get started?
Let's get started. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Yesterday, we visited with some of our nonprofit colleagues on nonprofit annual reports. Today, we're going to focus on CSR reports for businesses, corporations, and really excited about that. I was going to start by asking a question. Emily, what's your experience with CSR reports?
So glad that you asked. For the last 20 years, I've been in corporate social responsibility and corporate social impact. I have read probably no fewer than 2,000 corporate social impact reports, have a super strong point of view on the good, the bad, the ugly. And we're here to give you all of our shorthand tips and tricks so that yours land solidly in the good column. Nathan, what about you? Same question.
Our firm has written, ideated, partnered with many businesses to develop these CSR reports in different forms: print, digital, accessories, media strategy around it. So we've done a lot of work in this area, and our goal today is to kind of share with you guys some of the lessons we've learned, some of the scars we've incurred in that process, and sort of the good, the bad, and the ugly, how you can take your CSR report to the next level.
Great. So you have two creators and also a sometimes critic.
I'd say two critics too.
All right, let's get in.
Okay, so today's presentation, I think many folks on this call are probably familiar with this scenario. I certainly am. It's January 11th. People have come back from the holidays, and all of a sudden there's like this looming deadline for this report. And our goal today is to help set you up for success on your 22 report, and then maybe help you get a little bit further ahead on your 23 report, which is not so far in the future. Many folks don't necessarily plan this in the right way, and as a result of just lots of inertia and human things, we sort of get in this position where we're looking into this abyss, and then there's a scramble, and because of time pressures and limited resources and just sort of a lot of things come to a head when you're creating the annual report. So our goal today is to kind of lay out some ways to think about this, and some things to clarify on the front end, and some organizational things that you can put in place to ensure that you're not in this situation, January 11th, kind of tearing your hair out, thinking about how quickly you need to turn this around to get an annual report back for your stakeholders.
Right.
So
we're going to be going through, our top 10 reasons that most impact reports fall short. This will take us to about 10:20, and then we will happily open up for questions from the audience. They can be specific to your organization or more general in the field of CSR.
So please ask your questions anytime during the chat. In the chat, we will get to all the questions.
Absolutely. All right. The first one, the most important one, if you take nothing else away from this presentation, your North Star is missing. So everybody on this call is very familiar with corporate social responsibility. You know that there, oftentimes is a laundry list of good stuff that happens in the organization. There is sort of an inclination to include all of it. I would really push against that inclination. The purpose of an impact report is to really identify what you did that made a difference, how your work really created impact. And when you include and by the way, we hosted this dinner, and also, did you know that we did a volunteer project that doesn't really make sense in context of our larger CSR ecosystem, it starts to dilute the value of the impact report, because it's not about impact at that point, right? It's just sort of like here's everything that falls into like the good smorgasbord. So really be clear. If you're not already clear about what your North Star is, do that. We've got some exercises on the Ethos Giving website that can help you, that are, free resources, but really identify, what are we as a business in the business of doing as it relates to good, being a good neighbor, being a good steward of resources, being good to our people, and really identify that up front so that everybody understands how the document flows from that thesis.
And that's just a good practice in general, but it often comes to a head when you have to put pen to paper and develop this annual report, and people are saying, what is our North Star as an organization?
Great. All right. Number 2, you're burying the lead. I can't tell you how many social impact reports I've opened. A healthy food company, a company that does educational, curriculum resources, and they go into the things they've done that are good. They talk about the philanthropic donations that are made. They talk about volunteerism, and they don't mention that the whole reason this is all happening is it's actually the backbone of what the company does. So if the very thing that you do as a business is connected to the social impact work, and like, yes, it should be, if your company is already sort of in a lane, very briefly explain to us your work, how you're rooted in this, how this is your organization's expertise. If your work is connected geographically, like let's say you occupy a specific county as a business, and that's the reason that your social impact all is based in Macomb County, Georgia, great. Like remind us that's why this is all happening. It's a huge missed opportunity to not highlight. And I think something that the majority of social impact reports forget to talk about the corporation and the business of the business as it relates to impact. And I think it's a huge mistake. All right. Number 3, I'm sorry to say, I'm sure nobody on this call this is real for, but again, one of the things that I see over and over are folks making mountains out of molehills. If you actually went and single-handedly changed legislation that saved, created a better water supply for millions of people, amazing, like say that. But if what you actually did was have your boss attend one hearing and send a few letters, and you were part of a much larger coalition that resulted in that change, say that. I think we're in a moment where everybody, has a healthy dose of skepticism. As we say here, say what you do what you say. It is always better to be, on the border of humble versus hubris. Stick with a bit more humble. The work just feels much more genuine. And ultimately it leaves you in a place that's far less vulnerable, right? Like if you say, hey, because of us, like we saved literacy in this county, and that's not actually true, the impact report can actually create, a baseline that's a bit more harmful.
Absolutely. The most important thing that a brand has is trust with its audience. And if you break that trust, if you lose that ability to really share in a way that people are going to believe what you're saying, it's a huge problem, and you can't do that.
All right. Nathan, and these are yours.
Your report is too long and wordy. There are no extra points for word count. Sometimes that gets forgotten, and just sort of the nature of some of these of the exercise of building a report, particularly in a larger kind of organization where everybody has their sacred cow, and everyone wants something included. It ultimately often creates a much less effective final product. You gotta cut your darlings and leave them on the editing room floor. It's a hard thing to do, but I think you have to, as an organization, empower your comms team to look at this from the perspective of what is going to be the best outcome for the product. And so make sure it's as short as it possibly can be, and no shorter than that. Use strong visuals. Particularly now, people just the reports that distill down into the few sentences as opposed to really long, lengthy paragraphs. They just do a much better job of conveying this. Most readers don't want to spend the time to read long reports and with a lot of words. So think about how you can use those visuals to tell the story and cut down to as few sentences as possible. And
this goes back to number 1. If you know your North Star, you know what's ancillary and you know what's core, stick to the core. You'll probably save many pages as a result. All right, your data is a disaster. Unfortunately, this feels like the rule and not the exception. If this is you, you're not alone. Don't feel bad, but do make some changes. So we know, especially in corporations, good is emanating from so many different parts of your business. Of course, there's philanthropy and CSR. There's also supply chain partners that are doing good work. If you're in real estate, you know, the places and spaces that you occupy and the way that you occupy them are relevant. If you're doing in-kind donations on the product side, you know, we understand that it's hard to herd this information, but you have to. And the absolute best way to do it is to have that be part of a regular maintenance cycle and to have some standard operating procedures the same way you do for any other part of the business. You wouldn't look at any other function, like think of accounting, and they're like, hey, we're not even going to look at numbers until the end of the year and just take 12 months of information and then suss through it. That's ridiculous, right? So it's ridiculous as it relates to impact data as well. We recommend at least on a quarterly basis, you're doing maintenance, you're doing, you know, regular data maintenance, and depending on how busy things are and who's engaged, you know, that should probably be even monthly or more regularly. The other thing that's relevant, it's not just the, you know, first level data. How many people attended this thing? How much money did we give? How many volunteers did we give? Great, super duper. Why did that matter? What were the KPIs that you were seeking? Why did you make those choices? And did you achieve those goals? And really making sure that the data includes that secondary level of analysis. And that's when data can really matter and be powerful. And that's what we mean when your data is a disaster. You don't have everything in one place and you haven't really gotten that analysis layer in, and that's okay. That may not be something you can solve for in 22, no worries, but that is something to really be thinking about for 23. January 11th is the perfect day to be thinking about how to set up your data for success on a going forward basis.
And when you have your data in order, it empowers everyone on the team to do a better job at their job. As a comms person, you often come in and you want to be able to tell a story, but you don't know what the story is. But and when we're spending all our time chasing people down on the team, you know, when we're, you know, often it just falls to whoever is there, and often it falls on the comms team to go chase the regional manager at this place and the store manager here, and trying to piece that all together after the fact is really, really challenging. And then instead of doing the work of creating, writing, you know, developing a strategy around the report, you're just chasing data. So.
For sure. And I'd be remiss, I forgot the footnote. If you're looking for a data tracking solution, look no further than Ethos Tracking, which is our solution that we created in-house, that's now available for, you know, customers everywhere. And you can check out that link, and we're happy to chat data. But regardless of whether you use our system or not, there's some, I think, really good high-level rules of the road that you can use that website to identify and implement yourselves.
Absolutely. Ethos Tracking is built just to collect your data in that way. So I think it's a really valuable tool for us as a comms partner of Ethos Tracking. We use it quite a bit, and it's really, really great solution for everyone on the team. Okay.
All right.
Your writing lacks polish and purpose. Unfortunately, not many folks are going to win writing awards for their annual reports. Just in general, it's what they should, because it should be really a cornerstone of it should be an incredible comms product that people are really proud of. But what often happens is, you know, I've seen this way too many times. You have one person at 3 a.m. writing the report single-handedly, and then they're just kind of turning it around.
Or you have like 6 people writing different parts of the report because they have different expertise.
So sometimes this is just a timing and resource issue where people don't allocate enough time or enough resources to their comms team to let them do their work well. And sometimes there's just not enough talented people who are actually doing the report, and you need people who are great writers, who can, you know, who can pull together something that's compelling. We always, you know, here at Millrink, we talk about the 3 C's. The great writing is clear, concise, and compelling. You know, make sure that people understand what you're talking about. A lot of corporate reports are full of jargon, full of sort of euphemisms. Cut that stuff out. Really think about how you can communicate in a way that the target audience will understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Again, concise. You don't want it to be too long. And then you want it to be compelling. You want it to fly off the page. You want people to really be moved, to be able to follow both the rational flow of the argument and have an emotional connection to what you're saying.
Awesome.
You need more compelling stories. I often say, since man was living in a cave painting on a wall, humans have been hardwired to really to connect to other human stories. It's hardwired into our DNA. And this is perhaps one of the most powerful tools that you have as a communicator, is to find those specific human stories of people whose lives you made a difference in, people who have been affected by your work in one way or another. And finding those stories is not easy, and telling those stories is not easy. So you have to develop the time, and have the plan in place that you can collect enough stories so that you're going to find the 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 most compelling that you can share in the report. You don't get, quality is much more important than quantity when it comes to defining these stories. So many times we meet with a client and they want to tell 10 stories and only 2 of them are really good and 8 are pretty kind of mediocre. And I always say, let's just focus on those 2 really great stories, tell them, in a way, give them enough space to really shine. And that's really important. Another thing I'll say is the stories should tell, the anecdotes you bring into an annual report should be part of a bigger story. If there was a really cool story that happened to happen, but is totally unrelated to what you do as a business or the broader theme of the report, probably you have to cut it out. And that's hard because sometimes you say, well, that's a really great story, I want to get it in there some way. When you wedge something in, it feels wedged in, and that's a problem. And
see number 3, don't make, molehills into mountains.
Exactly. And then, when you tell that story, you want to be able to appeal to the reader's emotions, bring those details out in the story that really, that help them understand why it was so compelling, help them put them into the shoes of the person whose story that you're trying to tell. That takes time and energy, and it takes a team that knows what it's doing. And I think it's really important that you prioritize this. Those reports that tell those stories, they're cut above the others.
Okay.
Your statistics are dull and vague. I have a master's in public policy. I spent many years in courses on, learning about statistics, and I see so many CSR reports where the stats don't say anything. First of all, make sure that they actually tell a story that's clear to the reader. You want to humanize your statistics too. So, when I worked in politics, we talked, an example we often would talk about was, don't just say it's a $800 billion tax cut. Say it's a tax cut that's going to save every American family, $1,200 a year, because you can relate to that number. It's human, it's specific, and you understand it. Where $800 billion is just a big number that nobody really can wrap their arms around. Whether you're dealing with sustainability metrics as a company, what it's going to, don't just say this is going to reduce our carbon footprint by 30%. Say this is going to take 2,000 trucks off the road, equivalent to 2,000 trucks off the road as a result of this innovation.
And I'll also just say, having lived as a CSR person in-house and now doing that work on a consulting basis with lots of companies, one of the reasons that I think these statistics become dull and vague or come across as dull and vague is because the report isn't written in collaboration with the folks who are the on-the-ground experts in the work. So have a coffee. I mean, I know we have a lot of practitioners in the CSR world on this call, but we also have folks on the comm side, which is great. You can't be successful without working together. So, before the report gets baked, have a cup of coffee, really push each other and say, okay, great, I see this statistic. I see how literacy rates have changed for this community. Tell me why that matters. Like, why are you proud of this? What's going on here? How is this different than, the work that happened previously, before the company got involved? And really get the information from the folks who are doing the work, and even maybe communicate with the third-party partners on the ground, on the NPO side, on the education side, whoever it is that you're working with, and say, hey, principal of the school that we're supporting, how did this provide game-changing value for you? And that I think will really animate these statistics versus, oh man, we're on a deadline, let's just plug this in. All right.
We have 2 more. I just want to make a plug. If you have questions, now's a good time to think of them. Put them in the chat. When we get to finish our top 10 list, we'll get to some questions.
All right, number 9 is super fast. Don't procrastinate. This is really just a human thing. It's not a social impact thing or a communications thing. But this is what we see all the time, and it really is the enemy of these reports being great. People just run out of bandwidth. Again, this may not be a helpful tip for 22. You may already be behind the 8 ball, and for that, I'm sorry. I wish you luck. But for 23, these tips that we've talked about, the data maintenance and some of these other preparatory things, you can be writing this report essentially all year long, so that when it comes to the 23 writing or the 24 writing next year, it's really just about polishing the content and the data that you've already built, and that's helpful.
And something we recommend we do with our clients is we'll have a quarterly check-in over the course of the year about next year's annual report, so the trains are already running, and you really know, and it identifies gaps, like maybe we don't have enough stories, and maybe we need to figure out a new plan for getting stories from this person or that person. And it's a lot easier to do it when you're actually when you're in the middle of it than trying to reverse engineer it at the end of the year, and and that's a lot more challenging. People leave organizations, people forget things, people don't know where files are, people don't take pictures when there's great events. There's so many things that you can do if you're focused on it, and you don't need to spend a lot of time, just a little time, and it'll save you so much time and energy, and emotional energy on the back end if you do it while you're proceeding along.
Amazing. All right, and the last piece, and I'm sure everyone's read reports like this. Your report lacks authentic passion. This is an impact report. This is a report that has to do with the heart and the soul of your organization, the work that you do, how you make the world a better place. This report is being read by future folks in your talent pipeline, by your current employees, by investors, by customers, potentially, and you want them to know that you give a damn, frankly, right? And so that has to come through. And if this writing is corporate and sanitized, and is, as Nate calls it, a snooze, that's such a bummer. You can have the best data in the world, your impact work can be so authentic, and if you aren't communicating it and sort of breaking through in the way that you're telling these stories, it's just a shame. It's a missed opportunity. So what I would say here is, phone a friend. The folks who are working on this within your organization, or if you're working with third-party partners, are so close to it. Before it goes live, before you print it or push it online, have your mom, have your neighbor, have your roommate, have somebody kind of that is not in your inner orbit read it and say, like, does the passion come across? Do you understand who we are, what we do, why we do it? And really push yourselves on number 10 and make sure that you do check that box, because the reason you're doing this work is that it matters. I know that people wouldn't be on this call and you wouldn't be doing this work if that wasn't true. Make sure we know it in your report.
Great.
All right.
We're ready. Question time. Any questions? We are happy to answer. We've got our first question in. Emily, can you give us an example of what you mean by good data? What is good data?
Sure. So, sort of as we talked about, it's not about like, are the numbers positive? Do they make me happy? Is the information organized? Are we collecting this in a way that we're sure we're getting 100% of the information? Let's say you're running a program with 10 different nonprofit partners, and you get really clean, really thorough data from 8 of them, but not from the other 2. That is not good data. That's data that's not complete. So really identifying the sum total of what your data packages ought to include, and making sure that the data really has that. Again, Nate mentioned there's attrition, there's institutional knowledge that somebody leaves if they leave mid-year. If your data sets aren't supporting good institutional knowledge, your data can't help you from an analysis perspective, from a reporting perspective, and ultimately, forget your impact reports, from a decision-making perspective down the road. So there's value beyond your impact reports.
The difference between good data and bad data, from just I'll speak as a comms person. When you have bad data, then all of your efforts are engineered around trying to solve that problem. When you have good data, then you actually have the space to think creatively and to say, this is how we want to tell this story, and this is the data we have to support it. It's fundamentally different, and it's much better if you can get this in place ahead of time.
All right, Nathan, how can we make KPIs feel less boring?
Less boring. I think it's really important to keep that North Star. Think about what is the mission of the organization from a social impact perspective. When you have that distilled down, and I think ethos giving track clients have that North Star, and they understand it, and from there everything else flows. It sets the table to create KPIs that are clear, that are specific, and that relate to a broader mission. You have the thesis, and then these are all sub-thesis kind of points underneath it, and that's where KPIs feel less boring because they're meaningful and they're impactful and they make sense. Yeah. When they're just sort of randomly chosen and pulled out of thin air, you lose some. It loses the effectiveness and the relevance to the team. And
I would just add, as Nate shared, sort of putting things into bite-sized context so people understand how it relates to them, right? Like the trucks on the road, or the multi-billion-dollar tax packages, what that means for $1,200 for your family, but also contextualizing it in larger public policy. So if I in an impact report say, our work helped to increase college graduation rates by 5% or by 700 people at this university, if I don't understand like what a big deal that is, it's kind of whoop-de-doo. Yeah. So compare the A/B. Say before we started doing this work, here was the landscape, and because of this work, because of these KPIs, this has occurred, and that can be really meaningful. Okay, so Evan asks, any differences, nuances, or suggestions that you might have for a nonprofit versus a for-profit or business report? So this is a great question. I'll maybe take first bat and you can take second. You know, the core purpose, if you think about an audience, the core purpose of a nonprofit social impact report or, you know, annual report is that they want to continue to gain supporters. They want people to join them, right? And that is a very different thing than the corporate social responsibility report, which is ultimately corporations want people to understand and appreciate that they're the real deal. So one is really about gaining partnerships and one is about gaining authenticity. Beyond that, much of the content is pretty similar. I mean, you would be kind of amazed in 2023 if you were to close your eyes and say, let me give you a description of what this nonprofit's doing, and let me give you a description of what this corporation's doing. You may have trouble identifying which one's an NPO, which one's a 501c3, and which one's a for-profit. There's so many amazing companies doing great work and so many great nonprofits that have really, you know, continued to do what they've always done, which is make the world a better place. But I would say that's the main difference. And that really does come across in the way that you think about persuasion, the way that you think about examples, the way that you think about narrative. And, you know, it's an interesting question, but I would say what they both have in common is that they should make you feel empowered and impressed and motivated.
I think there's a functional difference. Again, when we talked about the for-profit report is about different stakeholders, whether that's public markets, whether that's you know, private investors, whether that's partners, whether that's consumers, and every corporation or business that you put together a CSR report has a different basket of stakeholders that they care about, or they're of different importance, so you're shading it accordingly. Where nonprofits generally they're mostly about donors, you know, supporters, and there's also some of these partners or policymakers or regulators, depending on what kind of work they're doing. Also, there's different flavors. I do think there's a broader tonal difference between the two. You know, just the colors they use, the tone of voice they use, the way that examples, the way they get laid out in general. Not always. There's a different look and feel for a nonprofit report, which is it's just a little bit more casual, I would say. Not always, again, but it's, you know, it depends on the nonprofit and the corporation. But just from my experience working on both sides of the aisle here, I think that is sort of one thing that I would point out.
Okay. So how much time should we budget for writing and editing reports?
Unfortunately, this again depends on the organization and depends on how much you have to get through. But I would say, think about how much time you need and double it.
And what I would say is, like, when you're thinking about how to budget time, identify how many people you need to get information from. That's a calculation. How many stories you want to tell as it relates to this, you know, sort of main North Star story. And also identify audiences. It may be that you actually have a base report, a core report that gets filed with the SEC or goes to the board or what have you. And then you want to make some sort of micro reports for your employees. Maybe you want to turn this and repackage it into a whole Instagram series for your, you know, community and for your customers. So really budgeting is understanding what the sum total of the product, the package needs to be as well.
If you have your data in order over the course of the year, I will say this: you're going to need a lot less time to write an editing report because it's there, it's ready to go, and then you just focus on the writing and editing.
Yeah, and then I just want to pick up this digital printed question because I think it parlays with what we just discussed. I would say, unless you have, you know, a reason from, you know, a board or like some sort of, you know, someone needs to hold this in their hands. I would say the majority, and I would say this is a good thing, the majority of corporate social responsibility, you know, impact reports are digital these days. If you're filing GRI reports because you have SEC compliance, I mean, those are all electronic. This really is where the work is going. If you want to be more creative and make the communication sing a bit more, build a microsite, have double clicks for videos. I mean, there's ways to create saturated, beautiful content online that you just can't do in a printed report. And I think also, you know, sort of as we think about the environment, like having a bunch of printed reports that get mailed to folks maybe is counter to the point that you're trying to make about your sustainability work.
And just to go back to the question earlier, I think nonprofits have a higher, there's more that have printed than for-profit, just because of the nature of their audience. And sometimes you get older donors that really want to look and feel it, and, you know, it makes sense in that context.
Okay, will I talk about ethos tracking? Of course, just a bit. We don't have a ton of time, and folks are welcome to check out the website or make a follow-up demo. This was really built to be an omnibus social impact tracking system. So if you think about corporations, again, we mentioned all of the ways that you could do good work: R&D, philanthropy, in-kind, volunteer, supply chain management, and. Having been in this work for 20 years, I didn't see all-in-one solution. You know, what I saw was people kind of scotch taping together a bunch of, QuickBooks and Excel information. And I felt like we really needed a one-stop shop where you could view and understand all of your information so that you could be better organized, do better reports, and ultimately lead and do your work better, which is really where it's all about, right? Like, we're doing this because we want to make the world a better place. So if you can't do that without good information, and that's what we built the tracker to help teams do.
Great. Final question. How long do you think reports should ultimately be, and how do you recommend cutting back on the content? Again, I'm sorry to give a it depends answer, but it really, I mean, if it's a startup with a thin amount of information to convey, it should be very short. If it's a giant or multinational organization with lots of different work, it probably has to be longer. But it doesn't have to, you don't have to tell every single thing that you did that year. I just want to make that it's important that you want to give a representative explanation of what you've done. But if it feels like a laundry list and it feels like you're trying to cram in everything, including the stuff that's less impressive or less important or less relevant to the North Star, cut that stuff out. So when you're thinking about cutting that, I would just go back to that first slide that Emily shared, which is, what is your North Star? What's the most important thing? What's the impact you're trying to make in the world? Are you telling that story over the course of a report? And anything that doesn't really flow in there and it doesn't really make sense in the context of that overarching message, that North Star, you should think about cutting it out. And that's a great way to sort of reduce and get the report focused, and more compelling.
I think the quick answer is as short as possible.
That would be the quick answer.
As short as possible.
Yep.
All right. We're just past the half hour. Really appreciate everyone's time. It's been so fun to chat about this with you, Nate Miller.
Thank you. We will make these slides available and the recording of today's webinar. So if you have friends that you think would benefit from it or would enjoy it, feel free to pass it along. And we really appreciate everyone for tuning in. Thanks.